Both of today's stories are about people who actually achieve their big career ambitions, but at an extremely high cost. But before we get into today's stories, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place because that's all we do. And we upload 2, 3, even 4 times every week. So if that's of interest to you, please replace the like button's nasal spray with super glue. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Okay, let's get into today's stories. On the afternoon of June 10th, 1871, a defense attorney named Clement V. Allendie GHM sat in a courtroom in Lebanon, Ohio, listening intently as a prosecutor questioned a witness. And with each word that this witness said on the stand, it made the knot in Clement's stomach get tighter and tighter and tighter and tighter. Because this testimony was very bad for Clement's client, an accused murderer named Thomas McGeehan. So the murder that McGeehan was on trial for had happened about 6 months earlier, on Christmas Eve in the nearby city of Hamilton. That night, McGeehan had stormed into a saloon with a group of men and attacked another man named Tom Myers. And at some point during this attack, a gun went off and Tom Myers was shot and killed. Now, there were at least 30 witnesses in the saloon at the time, but the whole attack had happened so fast and was so chaotic that no one had seen who did the actual shooting. Despite that, everyone in town immediately decided that McGeehan had done it. However, even Clement had to admit that that was a reasonable assumption. McGeehan and the victim, Tom Myers, had a long-standing feud, and everyone knew they hated each other. Also, McGeehan was a well-known violent criminal who was said to have killed at least 4 other people. So when Tom Myers got killed, the citizens of Hamilton didn't even wait for a trial. They wanted to hang McGeehan right now. Now, the police had obviously intervened and arrested McGeehan instead, but word had spread all over Ohio about how messy and dramatic this case was about. And as a result, the trial itself had become very high profile. Every day, journalists and important people from all over the state came to sit in court and listen to the testimony. And now, all of these important people were watching Clement's defense case get just obliterated by this witness. The witness was one of the men who had been in the saloon at the time of the murder, and he was making a very big claim. He was saying that, even though no one in the saloon saw McGeehan fire the gunshot that killed Tom Myers, he must have, because after the gun went off, this witness saw smoke coming from McGeehan's jacket pocket, like he had been concealing his gun inside his jacket when he had fired it. Clement looked around the courtroom while the witness explained this and saw that everybody was nodding, like what the witness said made perfect sense. Clement could tell basically at this point everybody thought his client was guilty. But Clement, he did not agree. He knew McGeehan's case looked bad, but Clement was absolutely certain that his client really was innocent. Clement's theory was that the victim, Tom Myers, had shot himself by accident when he pulled out his own gun during the fight to defend himself. Unfortunately for Clement though, this was 1871, so there was no forensic evidence about gunshots, except for some scorch marks on Tom Myers' shirt. So the whole entire case was really just based on witness testimony, and of course, this witness was very convincing for the other side. The prosecutor finished up his questioning and then walked back to his seat with a smirk on his face, like he knew what he had just done. They pretty much had just won the case. It was now Clement's turn with the witness, and he really didn't know how it was going to go. But as Clement stood up and crossed the courtroom floor, he felt a calm come over him because he was thinking to himself, I don't have much to lose. I mean, pretty much everybody thinks my client is guilty, and so if he's found guilty, no one's going to be shocked. But you know, maybe I can find a way to prove he's innocent, and that would be just great. But if I don't, it is what it is. So, to be clear, Clement was a very controversial figure in Ohio at this time, which was right after the Civil War. He had been very vocally against the then President Abraham Lincoln, and his viewpoints had gotten him banished from Ohio and the other northern states. And then after the war ended, he had returned to his home state of Ohio and had gone back to being an attorney. But he had never really been able to fully rehabilitate his public image. Even now, 6 years later, a lot of people still really hated him for behavior during the war. And so in essence, Clement knew that, pretty much, his public profile was not about to change if he lost this case. I mean, basically, nothing would change. You know, he's the guy that everybody hates and his client's the murderer. It is what it is. But if he won, he could recreate himself in the court of public opinion as a sensational criminal defense lawyer who overturned impossible cases. And again, he really believed his client was innocent. So this would be like a two-pronged major victory for Clement. And so Clement stepped up to the witness box and began firing off questions to this witness. By the end of the day, Clement had gotten that witness to admit he hadn't actually seen a physical gun. And eventually, Clement was able to completely destroy the jacket shooting theory when he showed the court that the jacket that McGeehan had been wearing that night, there was no hole anywhere on it. As the week went on and more witnesses took the stand, Clement was pleased to find that none of them had any actual proof that McGeehan shot Tom Myers. But he also couldn't find any evidence that proved his client was innocent either. So later that week, on Friday, June 16th, as the trial came to a close, Clement was kind of worried. I mean, he knew that he had not done enough to get his client acquitted. And even though he knew that the likelihood of success here was always going to be slim, he felt like he had begun to make some serious headway. And they could win. Victory felt possible, and it was just slipping out of his hand. That afternoon, Clement sat behind the defense table, sweating profusely as he listened to the prosecutor's team deliver their just brutal closing arguments. This was giving Clement a lot of anxiety. I mean, he was moments away from giving his own closing arguments, and it was really his very last chance to convince the jury that his client was innocent. But he just did not feel like the speech he had prepared would do that, especially after, the prosecutor's really just very powerful speech that he was giving right now. And so, as the prosecutor very eloquently and beautifully wrapped up his speech, Clement was busy furiously crossing out lines on his speech and rewriting things and trying to make it better. But he just couldn't. So he just sat there, racking his brain on what to say. But as he was sitting there in silence, and like the prosecutor has sat down and everybody's waiting for Clement to stand up and deliver his speech here, an idea suddenly hit Clement. It hit him so hard that he actually just dropped his pen. He didn't know why this idea hadn't occurred to him earlier, but he suddenly realized there was a way he could prove McGeehan was innocent. It was so obvious, and if he was right, he would go down in history as probably the greatest defense attorney Ohio had ever seen. And so Clement, he lunged for his pen again and he frantically scribbled down what he was thinking. And then a minute later, he heard the judge call his name and tell him, "Come on, it's your turn to speak." And so Clement, he shot to his feet and he cleared his throat, and instead of launching into the speech he had prepared for this moment, he asked the judge to let him do it instead on Monday. The judge was a little apprehensive, but eventually they agreed. And when they did, Clement felt a surge of excitement rush through his body. And after the court proceedings officially ended for the day, Clement could not get out of there fast enough. Clement waited until nightfall to act. He needed to run a test to make sure his theory he was going to employ on Monday was correct. But he didn't want anybody from the prosecution team to see him doing it. So after dinner, Clement slipped out of his hotel and into the quiet streets of Lebanon. He'd spent the last few hours having dinner with some friends, and while he was pretty vague about what he actually planned to do tonight, he did tell them that they really needed to stay in town long enough to hear his big final argument on Monday. He was so confident in what he'd uncovered tonight doing this test that he was sure his speech on Monday would be like the greatest legal moment in the history of Ohio. And so now, as Clement made his way to the edge of town, he was filled with adrenaline and kept increasing his speed until he was basically running. And then he finally arrived at a quiet, isolated part of Lebanon, and as soon as he got there, he set up for this test he had planned and then ran through it. And after he finished, Clement smiled because he knew he had just found a way to prove that his client was innocent. Just a few minutes later, around 9:09 p.m., and Clement was back inside of his hotel room. He was so excited about the results of his test that he couldn't even sit down. And so he just kept pacing around and trying to get his thoughts together, but he was just so excited. His hotel room door was cracked open, and as he paced around, he saw his co-counsel, who was another lawyer on the defense team, walk by. So this hotel was sort of like the home base of everyone who was in town for the trial, and so most of the prosecution and the defense teams were staying there. When Clement saw his co-counsel, he immediately waved him inside and tried to tell him what he'd figured out. But the words just kind of tumbled out, and all he really got across was that the prosecution had it all wrong, but he, Clement, had figured it out. But his co-counsel was just looking at him like he really didn't understand what he was saying. And so at some point, Clement realized he really needed to do a physical demonstration here. He really needed to repeat the test he had just done to show the co-counsel exactly what he was talking about. So without a whole lot of explanation to his co-counsel, Clement got up. He set up the test, and then he turned and he told his co-counsel to watch carefully. And then Clement began to perform the test. But this time, during the test, there was a sudden explosion, and Clement collapsed to the ground. It would turn out that Clement's test did prove, without a shadow of a doubt, that his client really was innocent. His theory was that Tom Myers shot himself by fumbling with his own gun. But in order to make sure his theory held weight with the jury, he wanted to show everyone that it was definitely physically possible to do that. So when Clement had gone to the edge of town to do this test by himself for the first time, he took a gun with him and he, basically, experimented with ways it could have actually happened by shooting the gun through fabric from different angles and looking at the resulting scorch marks. And when he did this, he realized that the scorch marks that had been left on the victim's clothes, the only forensic evidence they had, they could have only been made if the victim was shot at point-blank range, which meant that McDehan was standing too far away to be the shooter. But it was not until later, when Clement acted out the shooting again for his co-counsel, that his discovery went from great to perfect. Because completely by accident, he did exactly what Tom Myers had done. He fumbled with the gun and shot himself. Clement died from his self-inflicted wound 12 hours later, but his death made his argument so convincing that his client was eventually acquitted. So Clement had been right. This was the greatest case of his life. It was also his last. Our second and final story is about a song, but we're not going to be playing this song during the episode, and when you get to the end of this story, you'll see why. On an overcast, chilly Sunday in the fall of 32-year-old composer R.E.Z. Saussure sat in his apartment in Paris trying to write a new melody. He'd been at it for hours and it was not going well at all. Each time he jotted down a new combination of notes, he'd just tear it up and toss it into his trash bin, where there was already a pile of other discarded drafts. So R.E.Z. was used to this kind of messy creative process. He had made a name for himself as a musician in his home country of Hungary over the last decade. He'd written more than 40 musical compositions for various singers and artists, and a few had been really successful. So R.E.Z. knew he had the talent to be a huge star and to change people's lives with this music. But recently, despite trying many different iterations on just allowing the messy creative process to take hold and just kind of letting it run its course, R.E.Z. still just could not come up with any new good work, mainly because he was incredibly stressed out. So, at this point in 1932, R.E.Z. and many other people were very nervous about the state of the world and their future, because there were really violent political views spreading across Europe, especially in Germany. This was still 7 years before the start of World War II, but Hitler and his Nazi party were already starting to gain power. And R.E.Z., who was Jewish, was worried about all the anti-Jewish rhetoric that the Nazis were spreading. And while that was terrifying and kept R.E.Z. up at night, the more urgent worry he had on a daily basis that was really impeding his creativity was how to literally afford food. Because the world was also in the middle of the Great Depression, which was a period of time in the 1920s and 30s when multiple countries were dealing with terrible economies and mass unemployment. Back in R.E.Z.'s home country of Hungary, things were especially bad and getting worse. Banks and businesses were closing almost every day, and more than a quarter of the population was unemployed, living in extreme poverty. so had moved to Paris so he could find more opportunities. Paris, after all, was the art mecca of Europe. And even though the state of the world felt depressing, so thought that the creative energy there would inspire him to create something beautiful amid all the darkness. But now, so Sidon leaned back to look around the tiny, drafty Parisian apartment of his. He'd been here for months and his fortune certainly had not changed. He still didn't have any work, and he still could not seem to write anything good. But so, he kept leaning back over and trying to write. But it was like immediately he would tear it up. And he was just getting more and more frustrated until finally, he just did give up and put his head in his hands and basically said, "I can't do this." It seemed like the harder he worked and the harder he tried to ignore all the despair and sadness and awful things going on in the world, the worse he felt. And obviously, the worse his work was. Like, right now, he actually almost felt physically ill from kind of bottling up all these competing, terrible feelings and thoughts. But as he thought about the fact that he was doing that, he suddenly decided he just can't do that anymore. He can't continue to keep that stuff in. It was at that moment that so exhaled and let in all the anguish he'd been trying to push away. Sadness and fear and quiet desperation just washed over him and into him, and he didn't fight it anymore. He just suddenly started writing. His pen flew across the page as wave after wave of terrible emotion hit him. And when he was done, he ran over to his piano to play the notes that he had just written. And as his fingers moved across the keys, a very slow, sad melody began to fill the air. And it was so beautiful and so sad that he actually felt like crying as he heard it. When he was done playing, he just sat back in his chair. And now tears filled his eyes and his heart was pounding so fast that he knew he needed to get some air fast, or he might actually just pass out. And so so went outside to take a walk and hoped the fresh air would help him snap out of the wild emotional fog that had just come over him. But the Paris streets were gray and cold, and this new melody continued to ring in his ears. He was thrilled that he'd actually written something real and powerful, for the first time in what felt like a long time. But it was such an intense expression of his own sadness that it almost hurt. Shortly into his walk, he heard somebody call his name. When he looked up, he saw it was his good friend, a poet named Laszlo Javier, who rushed right up to him. And right away, when so saw his friend, he felt himself lightening up a little bit. He liked Laszlo. They were both Hungarians in Paris trying to make good art and a name for themselves, but neither of them had really done it yet. But as soon as Laszlo reached so could tell that his friend seemed really upset about something too. And his friend told him that his fiancée had just ended things with him. And he was completely heartbroken. After Arezzo said that he was terribly sorry, the men just walked together in silence. They were both lost in their own sad, heavy feelings and neither of them could think of anything to say. And without even meaning to, Rizzo just began whistling the song that he had just written. And when he did this, it was like the tune had an immediate effect on Laszlo. His eyes welled up and he sort of began to cry. And also he began to sing along, using words from a very sad poem that he had recently written. Rizzo couldn't believe it because without even trying, Laszlo's words were perfectly fit for his melody. And so as this sort of impromptu collaboration has begun, the men went from this really dark, gloomy mood to a purely excited one. They were so inspired that they rushed into a nearby restaurant to sit and work out the rest of the song. And before they knew it, Rizzo had written an entire composition with Laszlo's lyrics. And the song was about someone whose lover had just died, and their desire to be reunited with them. When the men finished, they wanted to hear their song out loud. So they asked the restaurant's resident musicians to play it. And pretty soon their song, something that hadn't even existed a few hours ago, was blaring around the crowded restaurant. And as far as Rizzo and Laszlo could tell, everybody inside was loving this song. Some of the restaurant patrons actually cried, and others closed their eyes and just kind of swayed to the sound. It was what Rizzo had always hoped his music would do, which was truly affect those who heard it. Rizzo and Laszlo looked at each other. For the first time in days, They smiled Rizzo and Laszlo decided to call their song Gloomy Sunday. Since it had been created on that hazy fall Sunday, they both had a feeling that this tune was very special, and that it would finally be the thing that changed both of their lives. So, over the next few months, they took the song around to producers and tried to get somebody to buy it. And finally someone did. A company agreed to publish the sheet music and record it. After that, Rizzo went back to his shabby Parisian apartment and waited for the song to take hold and the money to start pouring in. But that's not what happened. As the months passed by, Rizzo didn't hear Gloomy Sunday on the radio or see it on any charts. Or he read in restaurants or performed in theaters. It was like it really had never existed at all. And this crushed Rizzo. He was even more upset and defeated than he had been before. He had written it because he'd gotten a taste of hope and it felt even worse to fail. After that, the rest of Rizzo's life in the state of the world got worse too. The Great Depression was still going strong. And as Hitler got more and more popular, people started to wonder if there was going to be a war. So Rizzo and pretty much everyone else around him just sank further into their fears and worries and kept praying for something to change. 3 years later, on a spring evening in 1935, Rizzo was back in Hungary, walking down a street in the country's capital city, Budapest. He was on his way to a friend's house, but as he strode down the sidewalk, he heard a song coming from an open window. He stopped cold and his heart began to pound because he knew that song. It was Gloomy Sunday. Rizzo had no idea how or why he was hearing a song which, as far as he knew, no one had really been that interested in. But it was completely shocking. I mean, someone he didn't know was listening to a song on the radio. That meant it was being put out on the airwaves and being consumed by the public. This was incredible, and so Rizzo just stood there, letting his own notes wash over him for the first time. Hearing this out in public. And then when it was done, he just stood there just absolutely beamed. And after that, for months, Gloomy Sunday was everywhere. Rizzo heard it played at social gatherings, streaming from people's windows. Street performers sang it to pass her by. And it was even performed at concert venues all over the city. And so, by the end of the year, it seemed like there was hardly anyone in Hungary who hadn't heard and loved his song. Rizzo even read in the papers that his song was being played in England, in France, and as far away as the United States. So Rizzo knew that he had actually done it. He had realized his dream of being a successful, internationally recognized composer, with a hit song that truly resonated with the public. A few months later, on a morning in late February of 1936, Rizzo left his apartment and was heading out for the day. And on his way down the street, he passed by a newsstand, and he noticed that one of the headlines mentioned his song, Gloomy Sunday, initially. He was really excited to see that he was getting some press. So he immediately grabbed a copy and opened it up to read. But as his eyes scanned the page, his stomach flipped because this was not good press. Actually, what this article had to say was so terrible that Rizzo's first reaction was that he'd read it wrong. And so he read it again and again and again and again and again. But each time he read it, it just said the same horrible thing. And so Rizzo found himself starting to panic. Rizzo quickly shut the paper and just began looking around him. And he saw there were a few other people who were also by the newsstand, and they were reading the same paper. And they were all talking to one another in hushed voices and pointing at that headline about his song. And Rizzo just stood there, listening to this unsettling murmur and feeling a wave of absolute horror wash over him. Over the next month, more and more headlines about Rizzo's song continued to appear in the papers, and it was like each day they only got worse. And then the story went international. I mean, the Catholic Church waited on it, and then the police got involved. Finally, one afternoon at the end of March in 1936, Rizzo was sitting at his piano staring down at the keys. He knew he should be writing music, but instead he was just filled with dread, just like he had been every day since he first read that dreadful headline. And then suddenly there was a knock at the door, and when Rizzo got up and answered it, a cold sweat broke out all over his body because it was the Budapest police, and they wanted him to come down to the station. Rizzo's pulse raced with nerves. But at this point he wasn't surprised, because by now, he knew that writing Gloomy Sunday had been a horrific mistake. Because it would turn out, Gloomy Sunday had been a very shockingly impactful song, just as Arezzo thought he wanted it to be. But over the course of the last year, the police had begun finding its sheet music or its written lyrics, or the actual song playing on record players at scenes of suicide. Dozens of people across Hungary, Europe, and the United States, from police officers to teenagers to waitstaff to students, had taken their own lives basically while listening to Gloomy Sunday. These deaths were so widespread that a Hungarian archbishop actually wrote a letter to the general public, begging them to stop hurting themselves. And multiple bans of the song itself were enacted across Europe, and England and the United States. On the day that the Budapest police knocked on Rizzo's door, they demanded that he stop sales of the song. And Rizzo agreed, and eventually so did the song's publisher and his musical partner. Laszlo and Rizzo's partner, Laszlo, was especially grief-stricken by this whole thing because his fiancée, the one who had broken his heart, on the day he had written this song with Rizzo, she ended up being one of the many suicide victims. Before she took her own life, she sent Laszlo a telegram which simply said, "Gloomy Sunday, no one knows why Gloomy Sunday potentially caused the sudden wave of death." One theory is that people were already really suffering from depression and feeling hopeless because of the Great Depression and the worsening political climate, and the song's popularity was either a coincidence or sort of an unfortunate trigger. As for Rizzo, he was devastated by the legacy of his song. Even though it did technically live up to his original vision, it did deeply resonate with people and was unquestionably a hit. And over the years, despite all the negative associations with the song, it's been translated into 28 different languages and was even performed by legendary singers like Frank Sinatra and Billie Holiday. Initially, there was an estimated 20 suicides attributed to Gloomy Sunday across Europe and the United States. In the years that have followed, however, lore around the song has only grown, and some estimates put the death toll in the hundreds. Although the numbers are difficult to verify, Rizzo never wrote another hit, and in fact, ultimately, he followed in the footsteps of some of his listeners. He jumped out the window of his 8th-floor apartment on another overcast Gloomy Sunday and died 2 days later. Before I wrap this episode up, I want to say that if you are experiencing suicidal thoughts or suicidal ideations, or you're just struggling right now, no. 1. You're not alone, but no. 2. You really need to talk to someone. Don't hold that stuff in. Thank you so much for watching today's episode. Let me know what you thought of it in the comments below. And remember, we have a whole playlist of places you can't go episodes ready for you to binge right now. So go ahead and click here and give them a watch. Alright, until next time, see you. The primary criticism of virtually every paranormal story out there is a lack of credibility. Either the person claiming the events happened lacks credibility themselves, or you just don't have any other corroborating evidence, like other people that witnessed it, other credible people that witnessed it, or in many cases, a lack of video or photo proof that said paranormal event happened. But in the case of the story today, you not only have a highly credible witness, a NASA robotics engineer, you also have other corroborating witnesses that are from that NASA engineer's family that were there and witnessed it with him. And you have, albeit limited, you do have video footage of what they are claiming happened that was paranormal. But before we get into all of that in today's story, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, well, that's what my channel is all about. And I upload 3 to 4 times a week. So if that's your thing, if you could gently pulverize the like button and then turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of my uploads every week. Alright, let's get into it. Bill Vail has always been incredibly scientifically minded. He's always had technical jobs his whole life. He took a job for 15 years at NASA as a robotics engineer. He also spent a little time as a pilot for NASA as well. He is just somebody that is very process-oriented, and in fact, his family and friends, they say this with respect, but they say that, Bill, he lacks an imagination. He's super pragmatic, super to the point, and doesn't really have time for. Call it creativity. He's all about facts. In 2002, Bill and his wife separate, and it catches Bill a little bit off guard, and it almost prompts like a midlife crisis for him where, before it had been really his work with NASA that had been fulfilling to him. And now he has this huge gap in his life and suddenly, he's looking around and he's like, what am I doing all this for? I don't have a family anymore. Like, what am I doing? And so he decides to move back home to Arlington, Texas, where his little brother lived. So when he gets to Arlington, he feels like he can have a fresh start in a way. It's his family around, so he doesn't feel quite as lonely. And he actually just takes a job at his brother's water purification company because he wasn't sure what he was going to do. He just knew that he needed to do something. So he gets a job at this water purification company and he starts working with his brother. And he finds that, even though it's not the same type of work that he was doing as a robotics engineer at NASA, it was nice to be working day in and day out with a family member. So Bill has only been living in Arlington for just a couple of months, and he'd only been at the water purification company for maybe a couple of weeks. And so when a Saturday house call was called into the company, and no one really wanted to do it, Bill thought, you know what. I'll take one for the team, make a good impression on my coworkers, and I'll take the house call. And what it involved is, as part of Bill's job, was to go demonstrate how to install and use this water purification system in a customer's home. The dispatcher for the water purification company said to Bill, she goes, hey, listen, this is a little bit weird, but the person who called was adamant that you be there at 5 o'clock. Not a minute earlier, not a minute later. And it was probably only about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And he's like, so what do I do? And she's like, I don't know, go get a bite to eat and just make sure you're there by 5. And so he does that. He's like, that's weird. But he drives around and he parks outside of the house a little ways down the street. And a couple minutes before 5, he gets out and he starts heading over to the property to do this house call. He starts walking up the path to this big brick house at for 59. And as he's getting closer to the steps, he can hear through the front door, which you can already tell it's slightly open. It's not latched all the way. He can hear screaming inside of this house. It sounds like a woman screaming, and it actually sounds like she's screaming, "Get out of here." But he doesn't really know what to make of it. He has a job to do. So he walks up to the door and even though it's open, he knocks. And now he can literally hear through the crack in the door that someone in this house is screaming. And he's listening, and finally he decides, well, I should probably just open it up and make sure everything's okay, 'cause I can hear someone screaming inside. The door is open. So he opens it up and he walks inside. He takes one step inside of the residence and just kind of peeks around. And he can see a little bit down the hall, off to the right, there's an opening to a room. And in the room are 3 men on their knees in a little circle. And a woman is walking around them in a circle. And she's holding a book in her hand. And she's speaking in tongues, just nonsensical, couldn't make sense of her language. But periodically, as she's circling them, and she's touching each of their heads, she's screaming, "Get out of here. Hey, these people, get out of here." Bill is about to leave. He knows that this is just too weird for him. But right before he does, the woman who's walking around the 3 men on the ground looks up at him and points directly at him and doesn't break eye contact and just holds her finger out, pointing at him. And he gets this very strange sense that, this woman wants to do harm to him. And so he just runs out the door and is like, yeah, I'm not going back in there. Goes back to his car and he calls the dispatcher back at the water purification company. And he's like, okay, I just took an insane house call. The lady in there is crazy. I'm not doing it. Don't reschedule. And if you do not put me on it, 'cause I will not go in there. Bill was a very straightforward guy and he's just not gonna let his imagination run wild with what they were doing. Those people are crazy and that's not my business. It's not my problem. And so he forgot about it. He just goes home to his house and he turns on the TV and he gets his microwave dinner. And he's just sitting there eating his food and just having a nice Saturday night to himself. when out of the corner of his eye, in his other room, and keep in mind, Bill lives alone and has no pets, out of the corner of his eye. He thinks he sees something small dart across the ground. He couldn't tell if it was flying through the room or if it was running through the room, but he just was like, oh, now I got, some rodent or a bird or something in my house. It must have snuck into the chimney. And so Bill is not scared. He's mostly frustrated that now he has to deal with some rodent in his house or some bird in his house or some bird in his house. So he puts his food down and he turns on all the lights, cause he was watching TV with the lights off. Turns on all the lights and just searches his house. He's quiet, listening, trying to hear where the thing went in his house. And he can't hear anything, and after over an hour, he just decides, well, geez, I don't know where it went. I don't know what it went. I don't know what it was. Maybe I didn't even see it in the first place. So that night, he wakes up suddenly to what feels like some small creature running over the foot of his bed, but over his foot, and it instantly wakes him up. And he instinctively sucks his legs up to his chest under his covers, as pretty much anybody would do when some random creature is running on your feet in the middle of the night. And he's like, great, this thing, it's probably, now you can tell it's a rat. It's a rodent. He's like, great, now it's literally in my bedroom, on my bedroom. And so he flips on the lights, and now he's just mad because this is right in the middle of the night. It's the last thing he needs. And he lights on, and he searches the room. He looks under, his dresser. He looks in the closet. He looks under his bed. He looks everywhere. And he can't find this thing. He's stopping periodically to listen, and he can't hear scurrying or anything. Did I imagine that as well? Cause I guess I don't know if I saw something darting out of the corner of my eye when I was watching TV. I think I did, and just now could that have been in my dream? Cause he didn't. He wasn't really awake for it happening. He woke up to it and thought it's what happened. And so he's starting to, tell himself that, you know what, I'm somehow creating this weird thought in my head. I probably didn't see anything downstairs and I was probably having a dream about this, rodent in my house. And that's what prompted the thought that something had touched my feet. And so he's like, all right, whatever, right. Turns off his lights and he goes back to bed. So Bill falls back asleep, but shortly thereafter, he wakes up again when his bed is violently shaking. And he wakes up and his bed shaking, and it stops almost immediately once he's awake. And he thinks that they're having an earthquake. So he jumps out of his bed and he's looking around to see if, things are gonna start falling on him. He runs to the window, he looks outside, he can't tell what's going on. He runs into the other room, and he can suddenly tell, cause he's in a bit of a panic, that there is no more shaking happening. The shaking's done, the house is totally silent. And he runs back to his bed and he has this thought, could I in my sleep have shaken my bed? And he had one of those huge four-poster beds, and he's trying to move it, and Bill's a big strong guy and he can barely move his bed. And he has this memory of, my bed was literally shaking. And he's like, no, this is 3 times that something strange has happened and I can't make sense of it. And being a very kind of pragmatic person, and not one with, as his family said, a wild imagination, he did not have that. He's like, okay, let's find out if there was an earthquake. So he goes online and he starts researching earthquakes. And he's thinking maybe if the earthquake had just happened, that the news would break right then and there. Some headline. There's nothing. And so he's like, okay, what other rational things could have caused my house to shake? Because again, there's no other damage in his house. Nothing else. It was just he felt the shaking and that was it. And so he starts researching what's in the area, and he finds that there was a military base, and actually, it's an air base right near his house, a couple miles away. And he's thinking, okay, well, when the fighter jets are taking off, that take off at all hours. Maybe there's a sonic boom from from one of the jets accelerating. And he didn't know if that was it, but he thought it could be it. And then he's like, oh, well, there's also all these oil rigs that are drilling in the area. Maybe there was an accident. So he's researching for, recent accidents at oil rigs, and he's trying to find a rational explanation for this bed-shaking incident. He also can't help but feel like, what happened with that thing I saw that was like touching my feet? Like he's not connecting the two events, but he has this weird sense that either something's wrong with him and he's losing his mind, or something really weird is happening in his property. So as he's trying to find this rational explanation, his internet goes out. So he tries troubleshooting it a couple times, but he can't get it to work. And so he calls the service provider to just have them see if they can fix it. And so he calls customer service, somebody picks up, and they're like, yep, your internet's out, let me fix it for you. Let me put you on a brief hold. And so they put him on hold, and as he's sitting there like listening to elevator music, like static KY sounds started coming through the receiver. And he's just noticing it. It's nothing significant. But then a voice comes into the phone that is speaking in tongues like nonsensical language, and it sounds almost threatening. At some point, Bill is just totally unsettled by this voice because it's just going on and on. He's been on hold now for like 2 minutes of this weird voice. He just hangs up. And like in just a couple of seconds, he gets a call back from the same customer service rep that he had just been speaking to. And he had an accent, and Bill picked up on it and said, "Hey, was I just talking to you?" And the customer service rep was like, "Yes, sorry, we got disconnected." And Bill says, "Did you hear that voice? Did you hear that strange voice on the phone?" And the customer service rep, who's mostly operates on a bit of a script, kind of deviates for a second and says, "Actually, yes, I did hear that. And I was actually trying to figure out how that could have been possible because we use a very secure phone line when we talk to our customers, and there's really no way for someone to actually block my ability to speak to you. Like, even if someone was on the call, you would still be able to hear me. And I was trying to yell to you and you weren't hearing me, so I don't know how that would have happened. I definitely heard the voice. I don't know what that was, and we're so sorry." So both of them are definitely weirded out by it. But the customer service rep, he's got a job to do, and he's like, "Hey, your internet works again. Thanks, talk to you soon." He hangs up, and Bill's left with his internet working again. But now that's the fourth strange thing. He has the thing that runs across the room as he's watching TV, he has the thing that ran across his feet at night, he has his bed shaking, and now he has this, like, devil voice speaking in tongues on the phone that the customer service rep also heard and couldn't make sense of. He decides to, I'm done doing research for the night. It's, 3 in the morning, or whatever it was. I'm gonna just try to get a couple hours of sleep because this is just starting to freak me out a little bit. So Bill gets back in his bed and he's trying to sleep. But he can't stop thinking about the fact that there have been strange occurrences in the span of just a couple of hours. And he can't help himself but start to feel a little bit worried that something that he doesn't understand is going on. Something bad is going on. And as he's sitting there desperately trying to sleep, he swears he can hear some sort of sound underneath his bed. He knows it could be his mind playing tricks on him, but it doesn't matter. He thinks he hears it. And it's now, he's officially spooked. Like a child, he pulls the covers over his head and he's just laying on his bed with the covers over his head, just basically trying to convince himself, like, this isn't happening. There isn't anything under your bed. Just relax, nothing's happening. He's got his legs sucked up, up near his chest. He's just under his sheets and the way he was positioned is he had left the light on in his room. And there was a light basically beaming down onto the sheet that was over the upper part of his body. So there's a little bit of light into the cavern under his sheets. And so he's holding it up over his head and as he's sitting there like trying to tell himself that nothing's going on. He looks down towards the foot of his bed under his covers, right? And he sees a hand slowly reaching up from the side of the bed, come up and try to grab his foot. And it just misses him, then retracts out from under the bed. Bill literally leaps out of bed, flips on every light, and is now in just absolute crisis mode. He immediately is like up against the wall. Doesn't even want to look under the bed, but eventually he does. He kind of pokes under. Nothing's down there. He looks around his room. There's no sign of anybody in the room. And now it's like, okay, you've had so many strange occurrences and none of it makes sense. Like, what are you going to do? And he had no idea. So Bill does not attempt to go back to bed that night. He goes downstairs, flips on every light in his house, starts drinking coffee, like he's awake. He's like, I'm not doing this tonight. And so he stays up the rest of the night. So the next day, Bill just tries to have a normal day. He doesn't want to think about what happened the night before, so he goes to work like normal. Doesn't tell anybody about it. Again, Bill, he's a straight shooter. He's not about to be, the former NASA robotics engineer that's like, hey, let me tell you about the paranormal stuff that's happening in my house. He's doing everything he can to not think like that. And so by the end of the day, he started to feel a little bit of anxiety as he's getting ready to go back to his house. Because he would have to potentially face some of the strange things that happened the night before. They could happen again tonight. And so he gets home, has all his lights on, He's not about to keep his lights off. And he's sitting in his chair. He always sits in the same one, where he was watching TV. And saw the thing dart across the room. He's sitting there and he's eating his microwave dinner. And he's watching TV again, all the lights on in his house. And he looks down for a minute to get another bite of food, and when he looks up, a bottle is zinging towards him. And he moves his head out of the way, and it hits the wall beside him and it breaks. It's a glass bottle and shatters on the ground. And then all the lights in the house go out. So Bill runs to the closet where he knows he has a flashlight. He opens it up, reaches for the flashlight, and as he's about to pull it out, he hears in the closet, towards the top of the closet, this loud slamming sound. And he had a couple pretty heavy boxes on the very top shelf in his closet. And it sounded like someone had almost lifted one up and then slammed it down on the top shelf. But obviously, he didn't do that, and it totally freaked him out. He grabs the flashlight, shines it in the closet. There's no one in there, there's nothing in there. And he backs out, and then the lights come back on. And his heart's racing because he knows what just happened. Someone just threw a bottle at his head. Someone just slammed something in his closet, and he's in full panic mode. And so the only person he can think to call is his brother, because he's not prepared to go to the police, because the things he would need to describe are kind of nonsensical sounding. But his brother, who's very rational, equally kind of pragmatic in his approach to everything, he calls his brother and he's like, get over here, Rhea. I got some weird stuff happening in my house and I just need a sanity check. And so his brother Bob, his younger brother Bob, he comes over. And as soon as Bob gets there, Bill is like he'd never had a discussion about the paranormal with his brother before, so he's just like, all right, this is gonna sound weird, but Bob, I need you to just go in this closet. And just go in the closet. And Bob's like, what in the world are you talking about? And Bill's like, please just go in there. I'm gonna shut the door and I want you to just tell me what happens. And so Bob's like, all right. Bob goes in the closet. Bill shuts the door behind him. Bill's just out there waiting, and Bill calls to Bob, hey, turn off the light. There's a little pull string, little tiny light bulb. Turn off the light in there. So, Bob's like, all right, turns off the light. And it's pitch black in there. And so at the time, Bob would not tell Bill what happened to him in the closet. Mostly because, if you put yourself in Bob's position, he doesn't have any of the context. He doesn't have anything that happened. He's never experienced anything like this before. And so what he experiences, he kind of chalks up to, probably, his own doing. He doesn't think that someone did it to him. And so what happens is, he's in the closet and he feels something hit his leg. And he thinks, oh, I must have knocked into something that hit my leg, like a pair of shoes or something. And he's just standing there, and then something hits him hard in the face. And he thinks, oh, I must have. I must have hit something on the top shelf that fell and hit me in the head. But the two things combined, it didn't settle him a little bit. And he consciously decided, I'm not going to tell my brother Bill that this happened, cause I'll only feed into his own paranoia right now, and that's not what he needs. Opens the closet, gets out, and he's like, you know what, Bill? Nothing happened in there. You got nothing to worry about. There's nothing in here. And so he leaves, and Bill is left kind of crestfallen because he feels like he really didn't do a good job conveying to his brother just how much had happened in the house so far. He basically said, I've heard some strange noises, go in the closet, and then nothing really happened. So he feels like out of his element. He just feels like he doesn't know how to handle it. And so he has only one other person that he feels comfortable kind of letting into this situation, cause it was just kind of embarrassing for Bill. I mean, he's this esteemed NASA employee. The last thing he wants is to have somebody think that he's, like, losing his mind a little bit. But he has his friend Michael, who is a sound engineer that worked for a couple podcasts. And when he calls him, Bill doesn't even really know what he's going to say to Michael. He just needed to talk to someone, like a friendly voice kind of thing. And he calls him, and Michael's a little bit surprised to see Bill calling him. And they have a little bit of small talk. And Bill says to Michael, you know, I don't know how to approach this with you, but I moved to Arlington and I got some weird stuff going on in my house. And I guess I'm just telling you because I don't know what else to do. And so Michael's, like, a little bit caught off guard, is a little bit just worried about his friend. And he starts asking him some basic questions. Just, oh, well, what have you heard? Like, you know, what have you seen? Just not really sure if it's even remotely worth exploring, but just asking some basic questions. And as they're having this exchange, the voice that came on the phone during the call to the customer service rep for the internet provider came on the phone. And all of a sudden, Bill can't hear Michael and Michael can't hear Bill. All they both hear is this voice, this, like angry, kind of demonic sounding voice that sounds very threatening. And so while this is going on, Michael just instinctively is like, well, I have all my sound set up here, and he grabs a mic and he puts it to the receiver and starts recording. And for a minute and a half, he sits there recording this voice. And then about 30 seconds into the recording, not that Michael could hear it, Bill on the other end, who's heard this voice before, and he's starting to get the feeling that this whole thing is bad. Like, it's bad. And he starts yelling to Michael to hang up. Don't listen to this. Hang up. Hang up the phone. Don't listen to the voice. He's yelling for him. And then after about a minute and a half of this chaos that Michael's recording, the voice suddenly stops. And it goes back to Bill and Michael talking to each other, and it's like crystal clear. And so Michael immediately says, hey Bill, you there? And Bill's like, yeah, I'm here, I was trying to get you to get off the phone. You can't listen to this stuff. I don't know what it is, but it's bad. And Michael just goes, no, listen, I recorded that. Here, let me play it back for you. And so he starts playing it back, and it's silence. Except for when Bill was yelling to Michael, don't listen to it. Hang up. Don't listen to it. And Michael is yelling in the beginning to Bill, like, hey, what is that? What is this? But then it's all silence in between. So they aren't speaking to each other, even though they're on the phone with each other, and they hear something, but the recording only picked up their voices, not the demonic, possessed-sounding voice. At this point, Bill is starting to get a little bit scared. Maybe he wouldn't admit to it, but he's alone in this house and all the strange stuff is happening. And he just decides that he's going to invite, his brother over for dinner. And Bill is in the chair that he always sits in, and Bob and his wife Cindy are on the couch. And they're kind of having a nice time. Bill recalled feeling, it was just nice to have other people in the house. And they're watching TV, and as they're watching TV, suddenly, Bill just stands up and kind of runs over to the room where he had originally seen that thing dart by. this rodent or whatever he saw. And Bob and Cindy obviously see him get up and run over, and they're like, "Hey, what did you see? What was that?" And Bill's like, "Okay, I don't know how to describe what I saw, but I saw this thing that's in my house. And you know, Bob, I brought you over here because I've just been seeing this animal or something running around my house, and I swear I just saw it. I swear I just saw it." And he goes, "Hey, look, Bob, sit in my chair." 'Cause it was the only vantage point into this room. The couch where Bob and Cindy were sitting, they couldn't really see into this room. And he goes, "Just listen to me. Bobo, sit in my seat and just sit here and just watch the TV. Don't pay attention to the room. Just watch the TV and just see if something catches your eye. 'Cause you know, maybe I'm seeing something that is totally rational, but something's happening. Just do what I was doing." And so Bob's like, "All right." So he sits in the chair, Bill sits next to Cindy, and they start watching TV again. And Bob all of a sudden just clearly reacts to seeing something in the other room. And he goes, "Oh my God, what is that?" And they all stand up, and Bill is like, "What did you see?" And Bob's like, "I don't know. It was like some kind of small animal or something, and it looked like it was on 2 feet. It did not look like a 4-legged animal. That's like a 2-legged animal. Like, what was that?" And so Bob, he's now feeling like, "I was in that closet. Some weird stuff happened that I didn't tell Bill about. Now this," and he's like, "Okay, Cindy," his wife, "Cindy, you sit in the seat. You do this now." And so now, Bill and Bob are sitting on the couch watching Cindy, and Cindy's watching the TV. Of course, in just a matter of minutes, she sees something dart across the room. Now, was she just kind of jumping on the bandwagon because these two saw it? Maybe. But she certainly described the same thing that Bill and Bob claimed to have seen, which was a bipedal, a small creature that was just running through the dining room. And so the three of them turn on all the lights and they start searching the house. They're gonna find this animal or thing in the house. And they search everywhere for hours and they can't find anything. Finally, after, it's getting late, Bob and Cindy are like, "Hey Bill, I don't know what's happening in your house, but why don't you just come stay with us? We got a guest room. Just crash with us tonight, and you can come back in the morning and call animal control or whatever you want to do. But you shouldn't be here tonight. There's too many weird things happening here." Bill, in a way, was actually kind of happy, because now he had someone that he trusted and loved, his own family, that had confirmed that they were seeing the same things he was about. That even though that is terrifying that all of a sudden, Bill is alone in this house with some creature. This small bipedal creature running around the house, at least he wasn't losing his mind. Or if he was, at least other people were too. So he was kind of relieved and he was like, "You know what? I'm not gonna go with you because I don't want to just, give up my house. What will I do when I come back if it keeps happening? I don't want to just give this up." So Bob and Cindy leave, and now Bill is determined to, now for the first time, start looking up paranormal explanations for what was happening. So quickly, Bill realizes that you can't just search the paranormal. There's too many things online. It's so hard to tell what is considered, credible and what isn't, because there's just no fact-checking going on. It's just people kind of putting things on the internet. And so what he decided he would do is, instead of him doing the research, he would find a paranormal investigative team that, at least, appeared to approach their investigations much the way a scientist would, that instead of looking for proof, the paranormal exists, instead that their approach would be, looking for an answer. Up a couple of cameras in Bill's bedroom where a lot of the activities apparently was happening, and they set up these laser beams that basically beamed lasers in every direction. And they would place them in his bedroom, so there was laser beams all over the room. And if anything walked past any of these lasers, you would see the beams move, and it's very obvious. So, it's a way to detect motion in the room. And so, they set these beams up and they start filming. And for a long time, nothing is happening. Bill, Brian Hall, the team, are just sitting in the dining room downstairs, just like listening to silence and watching nothing happen. And so, Brian suggests, hey, why don't one of his team members go up and just literally interact with the room a little bit? Go in there, kind of like yell, do something, kind of stir it up, so to speak, and then we'll see if anything happens. And so, one of the team members goes up to the room and walks in, and it's like, hey, is anybody in here? And nothing's happening. You can see on the footage that, he jumps onto the bed and he's sitting on the bed. And at some point, as he's yelling out to whatever was in the room, like, hey, if you're in here, show yourself, all of a sudden on camera you hear a laser fall. He jumps out of bed and he runs out of the room. And the rest of the team comes up, and they gather up the cameras and they immediately watch the footage. And as they're watching the footage, you can see this mist that begins to form in the room that the team member who was in there just didn't see. And the mist starts swirling in front of the laser beams on the camera before you hear off camera one of the laser beams falling to the ground. So at first they're just kind of dumbfounded, and they're like, well, how did the mist get in there? Like, what is that? And is it possible that perhaps the laser beam rolled off a table or something? Maybe it was positioned in such a way that it could have rolled off. And so what they did is they raised the sound levels inside of the actual video, and they made out a couple of words. And so at this point, Brian Hall and his team feel like they have quite a bit of data that actually does lend credibility to the idea that there is something paranormal happening in Bill's house. So as they're packing up to leave, they say to Bill, like, you gotta go. You can't be here. Like, I'm surprised you're still here now. And Bill just was this super prideful guy, and he just was like, no, I'm gonna stay. Like, I've made the decision. I'm not gonna run. I'm gonna stay here in this house. And they're like, that's a bad idea. And honestly, they were right, because some pretty horrible stuff happens after they leave. So that night, he knows he's not gonna sleep. So he has all his lights on in his bedroom. He's sitting with his knees tucked up to his chin. He has upbeat music, like classical music, but very upbeat music, playing on the radio right next to his bedside. And he's just trying to, kind of create good vibes in his room. And so as he's sitting there, he hears what sounds like a Mack truck smashing into the side of his house. It was so loud and just deafening. And he instantly sprints out of his door, runs downstairs, runs outside too, inspect the damage to his property. And nothing's outside. There's nothing. There's no Mack truck. There's no damage to his house. There's nothing. He walks all around his property. Did something fall in the street? Am I losing my mind? What's going on? And so, he goes back in the house after quite a bit of looking around, seeing if something might have fallen off of his roof that made a sound. Nothing. He goes back in his house. And as soon as he steps foot in his house, he hears a similarly loud crashing sound, as if a vehicle smashing into his house, except it's inside of his house, in his dining room. It was in the same room where he first initially spotted that thing running across the ground. And so, he runs in there to look for some horrible damage to the inside of his house, but there's nothing disturbed. There's nothing shaking. There's nothing out of place. His dining room is intact. And as he's sitting there, he hears his car alarm go off outside. And now he's thinking, this thing is screwing with me. I'm not gonna let it win. I've stayed here against better judgment for multiple days. I'm not gonna give in now. And so, Bill kind of goes into fight mode. Now he's mad. And instead of being scared of what's happening, he starts screaming at the top of his lungs, show yourself. And so, as he's doing that, he hears yet another loud crashing sound up in his bedroom. And so, he runs upstairs ready to, fight with whatever this is in his house, cause it's gotten to a breaking point for Bill. He charges in his room. There's nothing in there. But Unlike the dining room and unlike when he was outside, the crashing sound continues while he's in the bedroom. So he's standing in his bedroom, holding his ears and the deafening crashing sounds over and over and over again. But there's nothing moving. There's no way for the sound to be emanating from that room, but it is. And after what feels like an eternity of this horrible smashing sound, it just completely stops. And it's dead silence. And Bill, lifts his hands off his ears and he's looking around and, he's expecting it to start again. But it doesn't end. And it's just dead silence in the entire house. After quite a while, and he still doesn't hear anything, he gets back in his bed. All the lights are on, his radio's on. And he tucks his legs up to his chin and he's just, holding himself basically in the fetal position. And he is, at this point, he's now just petrified. He had his big fight moment, but I think he's now thinking that this thing was just challenging me back. It's basically saying, I can do whatever I want to you, and you can't touch me. I can do whatever I want. You can't touch me. And he's realizing that maybe he could have made it worse. And he's sitting there knowing he's not going to sleep. It's still the middle of the night. And he starts hearing a noise that sounds like maybe shuffling the feet. Something's moving around underneath his bed. And as he's sitting on his bed, at the head of his bed near his pillow, with his feet tucked in, he looks at the foot of his bed and this huge, just wide, 6-foot tall black figure emerges. It's bright in the room, black figure emerges at the foot of his bed. It's got this huge stuff coming out of its mouth and it gets into this jerky position and starts moving towards Bill. And it gets right in front of him, and it puts its face right against Bill's, and then grunts, and then disappears. Bill continued to see this horrible black figure in his house, and it continued to kind of challenge Bill. And Bill stopped challenging it back. And so Bill started waking up with these scratches on his chest. He was hospitalized a couple of times, prompting the hospital to do welfare checks on Bill because he was showing up with these. Many heart attacks because of the stress that he claimed was from having the stuff happening to him. And his family so concerned. And it wasn't until Bill started really doing some aggressive research on demons that he read about, exorcisms. And he remembered that when he showed up for that house call, a lot of the language that he was hearing coming from that woman who was screaming, leave these people. Leave this house. It sounded like an exorcism. And he was thinking that, do you think it's possible that the exorcist knew that she needed another host for these demons? And so she planned it so that she would have this water purification person show up right at 5 p.m. so that she could be at the part of her exorcism where she could cast the demons onto him. After 2 exorcisms of her, of his own, to his house, it still hasn't stopped. He still to this day, is dealing with the paranormal activity in his house. And when asked why he hasn't sold his house, he thinks that he couldn't live with himself if he ever put another person through what he has dealt with at his house. I don't know about you, but I would not have lived in that house for an additional 18 years. That just sounds like the worst. But I'm not Bill, and so he's made up his mind that that's what he needs to do. But for me, anyways, I would have left that house. I would have abandoned that house more than likely. But I'd love to hear what you would do in that situation. And I'd love to just get your feedback on the story. It's interesting when you have a story like this coming from the mouth of someone so credible, like a NASA robotics engineer who's inherently skeptical, and having lots of corroborating evidence. I'd love to hear what you all think about this particular story, and whether you think this is true or just something else that's totally rational and easy to explain. Love to hear in the comments. That's gonna do it, guys. Before you go, if you want to get in touch with me, you can message me on Instagram. My handle is JohnBallen416. Also, I'm very active on TikTok. My handle is MrBallen. And if you like this video again, if you would please pulverize the like button and turn on all notifications so you can get more of these types of stories. That's gonna do it, guys. Take care.